Well, hello everyone. Phil Gigliotti back again, and this is One in Messiah here on Messianic Lamb Network. Welcome. If it's the first time you're tuning in, special welcome to you, and hope you enjoy it. And this program is on live every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And going to the Lamb Network website, which is lambnetwork.tv, lambnetwork.tv, there is an on-demand tab where you can watch this program or any of the other programs on Lamb at your convenience. So if you miss something you want to see, if you want to see something over again, you want to see part of something, the on-demand tab is a great resource to have there. And there's now at least 25 live programs on, and I think it's probably more than that now. And Mark David Smith, I always like to give him a thank you because he organizes all of this and has the programs going and all the things on the site going, and a lot of work and a lot of organization. And there's not only programs on Lamb, but there are sometimes special streamings of webinars, conferences, teachings, and that sort of thing. So you really need to check the Lamb Network site, lambnetwork.tv, for upcoming special programs, as well as a schedule of the regular live programs. So if you haven't tuned into this program before, One in Messiah, this is a Hebrew Roots ministry. It's a one new man ministry, and it is basically like the two names imply. And of course, there's many ministries that fit one or both of those headings. It's about teaching Hebrew roots through the church. And by church, I, of course, mean the body of Messiah in its general sense. I'm not talking about a specific denomination or group, but the church, capital C, because the whole idea of the Hebrew roots, in other words, the Tanakh in all its parts, Torah, the prophets, the writings, all prefigure Yeshua. Churches in general don't really have a grasp of Torah, the feast days, the prefigurements in Torah of Yeshua's atoning death with the blood atonement that's all through the Torah, the concept of a mediator, first lowercase m, then capital M, because it all points to him. And Yeshua himself said, not only did he say all the scripture testifies of me, but he says Moses wrote about me. So in other words, Moses wrote the 5 books of Torah, and they are about him because Torah prefigures Messiah. The prophets expand on that. The writings expand on that until finally you get to the birth of Messiah, his earthly time, and death, burial, and resurrection. So all of this goes through the scripture in a timeline, a panorama of events that starts in Genesis and ends at the end of Revelation, and starts in Genesis 3:15 when the promise of a redeemer comes through the seed of the woman, and he's going to crush the head of Satan. And of course, as we know, he is the only solution to the sin problem. And so, as Paul points out in Romans chapter 5, he says, while we were still sinners, he died for us. While we were his enemies, he died for us. Because he makes the peace. It's the atonement. It's the ultimate blood atonement. And so now, as today we're going to talk about Hanukkah, but as the church is now in the process of celebrating Christmas, the nativity of the Lord, these things are important to point out because, as we've been doing on this program, and if you go to my YouTube channel, which is One in Messiah Gift of Grace Ministries, One in Messiah Gift of Grace Ministries, there have been a lot of teachings that are over the last few weeks from the prophet Isaiah about how the plan of salvation unfolds, how Messiah is conceived, how he comes into the world, what the background of his coming into the world is based on the house of David. And then, of course, Isaiah goes on to say about his suffering, his death, and also, of course, that Gentiles will also come into the kingdom, because as Isaiah and David like to write, the nations will come, the nations will praise, the nations will be involved. And so here we are. And so it's an interesting time of year. There are all these Old Testament prophecies being read in all the churches, and it makes a great background, a great foundation for all of this. But since now, as this program is being done, we're pretty much exactly in the middle of Hanukkah. And tonight at sundown is going to be the fifth night, the fifth day. So you can see the Hanukkah behind me. It's often called a menorah, but of course it isn't a menorah, because the menorah has 3 lamps on each side of the center. The Hanukkah menorah, or the Hanukkah, has 4 on each center. And we're going to talk about this a little bit in a minute. Because of the 8 nights, because the oil in the temple lasted for 8 days when there was only enough for it to burn for 1 day. So the 4 letters that are used stand for a great miracle happened here. And it's a child game with the dreidels, and I'm not going to get into the dreidels. I'm not going to get into all that. But a great miracle happened with the oil. And Hanukkah, and then sometimes it's spelled with an H, and technically should be spelled with a CH because it starts with the Hebrew word chet, which is always transliterated as a CH. But regardless, it's commonly called the Festival of Lights. It's called the Feast of Dedication. But more precisely, it's a feast of rededication, because it involved a rededication of the temple. A rededication, and this is, of course, the second temple, which was defiled by Antiochus Epiphanes and the Syrian Greek armies that he led that occupied the land. And so, because the temple was defiled, it had to be undefiled. It had to be rededicated. It had to be recommissioned. Not an easy task. The vessels had to be remade. The flooring had to be replaced. I don't know what all was replaced, but there was only 1 day left of the holy oil that only the Levitical priests could prepare. And when they loaded that into the menorah that they had, it burned for 8 straight days. And so that was the great miracle that happened there. Probably, and it doesn't say so. Hanukkah is described, first of all, I should say, in the Maccabees, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which are apocryphal books. They're in the Septuagint, only in Greek. There was never a Hebrew version that was found. And so they were not accepted as canonical in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem, although the Jews in Alexandria and in some other places accepted them. But nevertheless, they were put into the scriptures when the church councils met that decided what the canon of the New Testament was going to be, they added the apocryphal books into the Old Testament. So if you see a Catholic or an Orthodox Bible, you'll see the apocryphal books. During the Reformation, they were removed from the canon because they were not in the Hebrew canon. And so that's that's some historical information, because Hanukkah is basically a historical holiday. It isn't a feast of the Lord. It's not one of the 7 feasts. Now, you guys, all of you watching this already know that. But many people don't know that. And many people just assume Hanukkah is one of the feast days. And it is not. Repeat, is not. And so it commemorates a miracle, but it also commemorates a series of historical events. And you can't really understand it without understanding the historical events that were started, which were initiated by Alexander the Great conquering the land, capital L, conquering the Holy Land. And Alexander was a young military genius. He was from Macedonia, and his empire spread from there all the way to India and included most of the Middle East, or at least the parts of the Middle East that were occupied, that were inhabited, I should say. And he had a huge empire. And many accounts say that when he won his last battle in India, he sat down and cried because he felt there were no lands left for him to conquer. So I'm not sure how he came to that conclusion, since if he looked over the horizon, he would see there was more land. But anyway, and he died when he was 33. And so this huge empire was Greek. Now, why is that important? Well, it brought the Greek language into the land. It brought the Greek system of education into the land. He commissioned people to translate the Tanakh into Greek, which they did in Alexandria, which was named after him. And that became the Septuagint, named after the 70 elders. And so it's sometimes abbreviated LXX in historical literature and in Bible commentary. So he had an impact, set up universities, brought in Greek culture, Greek language, Greek learning, some of which was good, some of which was not good, as we're going to see. Because, of course, it was a pagan culture. They had hundreds of gods. And all you have to do is fast forward to Acts chapter 17, when Paul is in Athens, and he's struck by all the temples and the shrines and the statues that there are. And the city's full of them. And Paul, as Saul of Tarsus, the Pharisee, was probably pretty troubled looking at all these statues and shrines and temples, but he uses that to try to evangelize the philosophers on the Areopagus. But this was the Greek culture, and that was also introduced into the Middle East. Not that the Canaanites and Moabites and all those other people, and the Philistines and the Assyrians, didn't have their own pagan gods, because of course they did. Now they had even more. And so good things came in and bad things came in. And when Alexander died, he divided the empire up among his 4 favorite generals. Divided in 4 favorite generals. And one of the fourths of it, of course, included the land of Israel, the Holy Land.